When I was young, I always saw my grandma sit on her long armchair, cautiously doing something that I had no idea. Until recently I visited her, she told me her stories about these things. They were stamps gathered over 70 years.
Oh, let us tell the stories of loves once lost and found, with each stamp a little window to a world that's all around. From penny blacks to red fine blues, treasures small but grand, pages filled with history held gently in your hand, in albums bound with care. Each stamp a tale unfolds, a tribute to the wanderers and stories yet untold.
The story begins in this small mountain village where electricity was a rare luxury. Roads were unpaved and no post office was in sight. Yet, it was the very place where my grandma met the very person who had ignited her passion of collecting stamps. And that was where her journey of collecting stamps quietly started. Ms. Chen, who was assigned to the school because of her questionable background, was a tall woman with long hair. According to my grandmother, she was highly educated, often used engaging activities to teach her students, and shared her enthusiasm for stamp collecting.
In 1954, I started primary school. When I reached grade 4, we welcomed a new head teacher, Chen Xichin. She was incredibly knowledgeable and deeply learned. What made her special was how she skillfully blended entertainment with teaching. During morning reading sessions or exercise breaks, she often shared fascinating lessons with us, particularly about stamp collecting. However, at that time, I couldn't fully grasp everything she taught. Curious and eager to learn, I would approach her whenever she was free, asking questions about collecting stamps, writing letters, and how others could send letters to me. She was always incredibly patient, taking the time to answer each of my questions. She often emphasized that stamps were like shining symbols of a nation, little treasures that would become invaluable historical artifacts in the future. Even though I couldn't fully comprehend her words back then, she explained them to me again and again, never losing her patience. Over time, her passion and persistence ignited a spark in me. Slowly but surely, I became completely hooked on the world of stamps.
These stamps told the story of Miss Chen and many educated adolescents at that time. They were all asked to leave cities for the countryside to learn from their fellow peasants and workers. They were depicted as happy and excited to show the success of the policy. Stamps at that time served as an effective propaganda tool, using the most straightforward and vivid picture to promote complex political ideas. Its frequent appearance on every envelope made it especially strong. Stamps could also serve as monuments of long-gone friendship. At that time, China and USSR were in their honeymoon period and just experienced the fierce Korean War. So many stamps at that time are focusing on hailing the unbreakable friendship, which broke in just a few years later.
So after understanding how to use stamps, I excitedly started writing to venerable PLA soldiers and Russian kids of my age, trying to communicate with them. But unfortunately, due to vague addresses, I doubted they were never delivered, so no one answered. I did not receive any stamps. I felt very disappointed.
Here we are at the original site of the second secondary school of Yibin. In 1960, my grandma was adopted by this school, one of the best high school at that time. But just after 1 year, something strange happened. Many students disappeared from classroom, and in a week, 14 to 15 students from urban areas joined the class. Many years later, did my grandma understand? Those disappearing students were sent back home because of so-called downsizing policy.
In 1960, I was accepted by a secondary school. I became a secondary school student. But at this moment, I also failed to collect any stamps in my first year. Why? Because students of my class were all from adjacent countryside. They are all from the countryside and didn't write letters. Plus, they went home every week, so there was no need for them to write a letter and use stamps. In my second year, about 14 to 15 classmates left, and in their place came 14 to 15 new students from urban schools that had been closed. During that period, my child, our country was extremely poor. We did not have well-functioning education system like now, and we could not support many schools in cities and close them. They are from Yibing Secondary School and have taken the places left vacant by the students who have departed. They became a stroke of luck for my stamp collecting. After their arrival, I finally had access to people who wrote letters, a rare and precious connection in those days. This was because they were far from their families and couldn't return home easily.
Nowadays, the school is well equipped, but this was not the case in the past.
Traffic condition was terrible at that time. The only way for these newcomers to get in touch with their families was letters. They not only wrote to their families, but also their friends, still in cities. I knew my chance finally came. Therefore, every time I saw a classmate writing a letter, my eyes would light up with greed. Without hesitation, I dashed over to their sides as soon as I spotted them handling letters, eagerly asking if they could spare me the used stamps. My excitement was so palpable that it often caught them off guard, but my persistence usually paid off. Since they had no interest in stamps beyond using them to deliver and receive their letters, many classmates gave me a plenty of stamps. Besides, since I was the head girl at the time and wielded my tiny kingdom of authority, saying no to me was practically a crime, punishable by death glares. Gradually, I built up my reputation as a little philatelist. When I was 16 years old, I got into a vocational college which guaranteed me a teaching position after graduation. I started earning money, which added fuel to my stamp collecting.
But the happy times didn't last long. The Cultural Revolution began, and although my grandma had no intention of getting involved in the turmoil, she couldn't escape its impact. Stamp collecting was condemned as a bourgeois activity and was strictly forbidden. Tragically, many of her precious stamps were lost during that turbulent period.
During the Cultural Revolution, the only way to collect stamps was through exchanges with acquaintances, friends, family or classmates. Every trade required effort and negotiation, often involving delicate discussions to reach an agreement. It was a challenging process, but for enthusiasts, it was the sole option to continue the passion in such restrictive times.